Right. Welcome to another episode of the podcast that is Life After Work. This is episode 52, and with me is the usual crew of guys. I'm Rod Maxwell. I am a presenter on local radio station RadioAlty. I retired 5.5 years ago due to a brain injury or brain tumor. And since then have been doing different bits and pieces. And we've been doing this podcast for almost 2 years, actually, but 52 episodes. And with me is the usual, well, we're a quartet of people in our 50s. So to my left, top quarter, but he may not know that, is Mr. Paul Davies. Paul, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you all, chaps. Paul Davies reporting in live from Skiathos, the sunny island of Greece, where it's currently around 26 degrees. Cooling off a little bit at the minute, cooling off. But yeah, beautiful. Good to see you all again after a couple of weeks, a week break, whatever it was we had.
And complete from a weekend of DIY, building himself an outdoor shack. The man is Ash Sharma. He's moved location, actually, haven't they?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm coming from sunny Sale in my back garden, so I'm under a gazebo that was built for my wife's 50th a few years ago. So yeah, so this is a bit of a change. In fact, every single one has been through that front room, hasn't it, basically? So yeah. I know Paul's done his a few times outside, haven't you?
I have indeed, yeah, but mine doesn't look like some Caribbean hut on a sunken beach like yours does.
I think he's just trying to boast about his Wi-Fi signal. That's all it is, you know.
Yeah, well, let's just fingers crossed it maintains it. Yeah.
And then bottom to me, the man who don't move from his spot in case the Wi-Fi goes down occasionally, Mr. Phil Harrison, again, refreshed from a weekend of sporting assertiveness.
I wouldn't say refreshed. I think exhausted more like. But yes, I've got my first triathlon of the year out of the way. Now my attentions will turn back to the trumpet gigging. So I've got a couple of things going on. So if anybody's at a loose end on Thursday night and fancies the Bridge in Prestbury for a bit of jazz from a jazz combo I'm playing with, they're more than welcome. And then on the 16th of June, I forget what it's called, but there's a social club or hall, community hall in Mobley. So I think it's called Mobley Community Hall or something like that. It's near the Cheshire Smokehouse. On the 16th of June, there's a bigger sort of big band, swing band gig then. So shameless plug for 2 events coming up.
Are you playing in them, Phil?
Yes, I'm playing the trumpet. Yeah.
Cool.
So that's my other hobby.
And rumours of Glastonbury are apparently not true. Is that right, Phil?
No, thankfully not. Yeah.
Anyway.
Montreux though.
Oh yes, I tell you, he always takes it up a class, so he does. He's the sort of would turn left every time he gets on board an aircraft. I would turn right and run.
I wish.
I've never turned left. I wish I could. Wow.
Anyway, let's talk today. So the topic which has been proposed by Ash is life for our children more or less stressful than our childhood? And I think this is going to throw up a few interesting views. So Ash, since you proposed it, what was it that sparked the thought behind this?
Well, it was my son Aaron. He's doing his GCSEs and he's been really diligent in revising, and I've just noticed that he just seems to be taking it more in his stride. He's not as stressed as I was, and I think a bit off air we were talking about this could simply be due to individual issues. I'm generally just possibly a more stressed out person than he is. But then we're talking about the culture that's in schools nowadays, in terms of universities, in terms of A levels and performance, getting the best people in classes into their schools. So maybe that trickles down. So that makes it more to the point that if it is a performance culture, and then we get kids who appear to be less stressed about it, that shows that, are they handling it better than we used to? Because are we alluding to the fact that in our day, it wasn't as performance focused than it is today?
So my take on this is that if I look at the experiences of my 3 kids, and our youngest is just at A-level stage now and just about to embark on A-levels. Compared to, I mean, compared to my experience at school, I think the schools have a much more direct and very conscious performance culture. And I think this has come down from the Department of Education all around, which is the schools themselves now rate themselves on the success of the kids. And that adds to the success of the schools, which adds to the popularity of the schools. And I personally think in some ways, the schools have gone a bit too far in putting pressure on the kids to perform. So I actually think I look at this expensive across our 3, and it was a wee bit different. But I do believe sometimes that the schools have gone too far on pushing a performance culture, because actually it makes the school and the teachers look better rather than just focusing on the individual ability of the kids. So I think to summarize, I think the kids have been put under far too much pressure to perform. And I think too many kids now are more stressed than they used to be before. But I've only got the experience in my own household to go after. So a slightly different take on you, I think, Ash.
And I think it's really difficult. I don't know. So I'll just offer suggestions rather than a definitive, strong opinion on it. That I suspect you're right in saying that there is more of an emphasis on a performance culture in education. But I wonder whether that's actually almost more directed at the teachers. I think to be a teacher, and I do have friends and family who are teachers and have been for a long time in 2 different generations. So I think there's evidence for what you're suggesting is that there is a greater emphasis on performance culture with league tables and the like, and real pressure on teachers. And no doubt that communicates across to children as well. But I actually think probably the element of performance pressure, let's call it, on the kids themselves, the pupils, I suspect has always been there. We were always, going back to my generation, I certainly felt it. I don't know how strongly, but so I think that's always been there. We've always had exams and marks and midterm tests and oh, goodness knows. So I think that's always been there. Is it worse for today's generation? I'm not sure. I don't know.
I personally think it's a damn sight easier for kids in school nowadays than it was in our day. And I don't care about this so-called pressure that they're under. For a start off, we had O-levels. They get some GCSEs, which are nowhere near as difficult as O-levels. We had an education system where if you were good at what you did and you were good at exams, you could get into a grammar school. You now can't. The only way you can get to a grammar school is pay for it, and that's ridiculous. They shouldn't have taken away you know what, I'm not going to call it the elite of kids, but those that have studied hard, worked hard, and shown an aptitude to learn, went to grammar school. I went to grammar school. I was under a little bit. No, I was a little bit of pressure from my parents, not a lot. I was under a great deal of pressure from the school, not because of so much as their reputation, if you like. I'm saying some of the reputation was in there, but they couldn't understand why kids who went to grammar school wouldn't come out with loads of O-levels. You know, they saw it as, you are blessed to be within a grammar school. You now have to work and prove that a grammar school education has made you what you should be. I studied. I mean, I came out with 7, 8 O-levels, whatever it was. And here's the thing: the reason there is a massive pressure on schools today is because the education system. First of all, kids have carte blanche as to what they do at school because there's no discipline. Don't care what anyone says. There's no discipline. What they're going to get a detention doesn't work anymore. They kind of run it. They get marks and assessments that they do throughout the year so they can cut it all up. It's a very touchy-feely environment within schools nowadays. You can't say boo to a goose without upsetting some sod. And what I found, what I've seen, is that the education authority are bloody quick to stick schools into what they call special measures if they're not performing as well as they used to do. The grammar school that I went to turned into a high school and has been as far as Ofcom, is it
Ofsted.
Ofsted, as far as Ofsted is, they wrote them off because they were totally, absolutely disgraceful. And that's a shift in culture. We've gone from a grammar school to anyone can go to that school to, if you want to do your work, but I can't make you do your work because I haven't got that discipline and support anymore. So kids can run riot. You'll get the occasional kid, or quite a few kids, I should say, who will think, you know what, I'm at school, I am going to try hard and I do want to better and make my life a lot better. But the leniency of schools today and all this, let's talk about it, and what you can't say and what you can say, it's not, there's no, I don't think there's any pressure for kids to go to school. I really don't.
To go to school?
Rod, they don't, there's no, what they're going to get a £60 fine. There's people going on holidays for 2 weeks because the kids, if they get caught, get a £60 fine for being off.
Maybe on holiday in term time.
Yeah, they'll save 700 quid on a holiday by not going in term time, but they'll get a 60 quid fine. It was never heard of in my day. Never heard of. Because if you didn't go to school, that was truant, and we had a truant officer, and there was a lot of measures made to make sure that didn't happen again. I've got to say, I loved school. I never played truant. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
It was, for me, it was a bit of a, not only an education situation, but a bit of a social thing as well. You had your good friends, but kids today, they just seem very blasé about. Take James Younglad, for instance. He's very blasé about it all. He's, I'll do this, blah, blah. He's just come out with college with 3 distinctions, so he's now been accepted by this university. But talking to him, you think, why don't you pull your finger out and do something? Well, he does. He's already done it. And because the work is dead laid back in the schools, that's made him done. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that there's the less. It's dead. It's so hard to quantify. Like Phil was saying, it's hard to quantify if they're under more pressure now today than they were, or if we were just under more pressure and we shouldn't have been under that sort of pressure. But it's very, I don't know. I'm on the fence with schools because I think the lack of discipline, or the taking away of the discipline, probably hasn't made it as good as it should be educationally wise. I don't know.
Well, if you're looking at I agree with you to some extent there, Paul, but if you look at the education system itself, when we were younger, so particularly if you look at A levels, so they had grade boundaries whereby they just said, right, we want 10%, for example, the JMB. I don't know if you guys ever had the JMB, or Joint Matriculation Board. So they would say, right, 10% are going to get A's, 20% are going to get a B, and then so on. And that was it. That was it. 10% would get an A no matter what. So one year, an A boundary might be 80%, and the next year, the A boundary might be 65% because it was harder. But nevertheless, it was always 10%. So like you said, Paul, you get the cream, basically, always done. So when he went to university, it was aspirational. You know that the A was worth an A, but now every year they say, 20% have got A's, 25% have got A's, 40% have got A's. And I think it just devalues the education all the time.
But you know what they've done, Ash, then they have an A+.
You see what I mean? Do you know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying.
On the other side of that, Ash, if you get a D, it's a pass.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
A pass, in my day, a pass was an A, a B, or a C.
Yeah, exactly.
A margin. Now D is a pass. Even an E is about, I'm going to get an A. Well, you're all right, because it's still a pass. We can't say you've failed anymore. Well, I'm sorry. If you get an Fs and Es, you failed. You're obviously not grasping the education.
So that's what I was saying. So if you're looking at it, I don't know if I've got rose-tinted glasses on or not, but I just think the amount of stress that we were under when we were younger, was higher because this education system was more demanding, and there was more mitigation. If you didn't do certain things, you either if you didn't get your C, as you say, Paul, you failed. That was it. There wasn't a D to fall back on. There wasn't an E to fall back on. There wasn't, if you did A levels, you could do your maths again the next year. It was, you did it. You've got to, yeah. The pressure was on all the way through. And I remember with, you filled your UCAS forms in, and it was I remember it being so stressful. It was horrible, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Do you think it changed all the way back? Because I was the last year to do O levels in Northern Ireland, which I think is the same in England. I think it was 86. I did my O levels, and then the year after me started GCSEs, and GCSEs seemed to be possibly an attempt to recalibrate the pass boundaries, if you like, and change the style of learning as well. So less all down to a series of exams and much more coursework based. Do you think that might have been a bit of a threshold, a bit of a change in the way that education was managed, or the culture of education?
Sure, definitely. I mean, if you look at the education, that's such a good point, because if you look at when we did our exams, I'm trying to think of the right, I would say when we did O levels and A levels, we actually were battle tested. We actually went through a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 exam, didn't we? We went through it. We went through that stress. And I'd tell you, I must have told you this, Rod, before, when we used to get, be careful how I phrase this, we used to get people, trainee dentists coming to work at the practice. Okay, they were there. I'm not joking. They didn't, they don't know their arse from their elbow. I'm asking, I'm saying, I'm going on holiday. Do you mind cementing this veneer for me? I go, I haven't done that before. I say, you're qualified, for F's sake. For goodness sake. So what I'm saying is, I don't know if it's been dumbed down or not, but I'm saying the nature of the testing is very, very different now. A lot more coursework. There's less exam-based things going on now. And so when they go out into the big wide world, they don't have that stress. They've not been through that stress, I don't think. And it's a reflection on a lot of the young today. They can't handle it. And, like you said, Paul, they've never had a failure. They've never confronted not reaching their aspirations, because it's been masked. If they've not got to where they wanted, it was all right, you didn't get your B, well, at least you got a D, that's fine. Don't worry about that. There's always something you can do. And they've never had to face that, have they?
Now, you see, that's the exact nail on the head there. And that's what I mean about the education system. Turning D's and E's and some F's into you don't fail anymore, do you?
No.
You just get past. And this is why they're all, okay, I might not go. And then they hit the workplace. The workplace, bosses,
it's unforgiving.
They're not going to stand for, you did, let's hug, you've done really well. If you don't do well, you're out. And that's what's causing the stress of kids. They're thinking, they're making me work 8 hours or 10 hours, or they put me on a 10-hour shift. It's like, you know what? Welcome to life. That's what it's all about. There we are. That's going to pay your bills. That's going to get your mortgage. That's going to do, so you can do the things. There's no teacher, giving you a hug and telling you everything will be okay, because it won't be.
It's a culture shock, isn't it?
I put my money on it. This is why we have seen an incredible increase in mental health issues with youngsters in the 20s, from 18 up to the mid-20s. I can guarantee, because this sudden realization that they have to work or do something has hit them.
But
and that's why I think
just to put an alternative view on this, and more moving into university careers. Do you not think the fact now that students come out with a lot of debt, which is a combination of their fees, which they have to pay for, etc., do you not think that puts them under more pressure, certainly at the university level, where if they don't pick the right course, if they don't make the right decisions at university, that they're going to end up with this £30,000-40,000 debt, and not necessarily the right qualifications to give them the job that will pay for it. And so, do you not think that is a more stressful situation than what we had, which is, you didn't pay for your fees. A lot of people got grants or etc. Do you not think that is a change in the whole education landscape?
It should do, shouldn't it? There's an obvious way of looking at it that says that would stress anybody, but my experience, not my personal experience of my children, it doesn't seem to. Now, I think that's just basically because they're oblivious. They're just, or they're accepting of there is no other choice. That's how it is, and therefore they accept that. Doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean I support it even, but from their point of view, their attitude towards it, that doesn't seem to stress them. Probably stresses me more than it stresses them.
I personally think, and I've said this for many years, people who have to pay, the nation should never, ever have to pay for an education and to better themselves, because unfortunately we do miss the people who can't afford to go to the universities but are so switched on, maybe come from poor backgrounds or, family troubles. And it's a shame. We should never, no child, young adults who has mentality and a good brain and can possibly change in the future, in the future, could change the country, the world for the better, should have to pay for an education to bring out that flair in them, to bring out that intelligence. I think it's all wrong that they pay for education.
Agreed.
I do.
But we focused a lot on education here, and I think the question was, is life for our children more stressful? And certainly education is a big part of that. But if you look more broadly at the life and their experiences, do you think that they experience more of life earlier in their lives than we are, and that in some ways they are too overly exposed to life at an early age?
I don't think necessarily that. I do think they've got it harder. When you look at whether it is that educational debt or the housing market. But again, I don't think it necessarily stresses them, because I don't think they realise. Again, how are they able to compare our experience with theirs? We can compare it because we've been through it and we see them, but they haven't seen our experience. And I think it would stress them, disappoint them massively if they knew how hard it is in some respects. I agree with your points earlier about education, Paul, but I think generally looking around, what are the prospects of getting your own house by the time you're 30, even with a pretty darn good job?
Well, I don't think that stresses people out anymore, because I think they've become ambivalent to that.
They have, either through a bit of obliviousness to it, or sort of resignation to it. Because again, what can you do? It is just how it is. I'd almost like there to be a bit more, not stress, but more outrage about it, and actually saying, we've gone backwards as a country, we've gone backwards as a society. Now everything has a price, strangely enough. And I think with standard livings, even before this current living standards crisis or cost of living crisis, they've been on the retreat, and it's highly depressing.
Yeah,
but I don't think it stresses them because they don't realise.
I think it's symptomatic of
sorry, Ash, I'm just very quickly, the thing that's wrong with the UK and possibly the world over, we are not gearing up and getting ready for the future generations to come on board. We've made it. Now, don't get me wrong, I think kids of today are sort of living in a sugar-coated world up until the age that they leave home. I really think they sort of live in a world of candy floss, because everything's easy for them and no one's going to say a bad word against them. But by the same token, if they can't move forward by getting a house or, getting an education or getting that job that they need, if there's no future for them to work towards, what's the state of the country going to be like?
Yeah, exactly. And as you've hinted, I think there's an element of resignation, and it turns off the aspiration of that generation, because they're thinking, well, what's the point? It's they don't have that carrot to work for.
Yeah, and it's like, let's go back to education. We knew in our day, if you got a job, if you got a good education, you get a decent job. You know that if you got a decent job, 3 times your wage would get you a decent mortgage. Because they times it by 3. Sometimes in the good old days, it was like 4 times your wage for those unscrupulous lenders that give you 4 times your wage. But you knew we had a set pattern, didn't we? We went to school, we lived with our parents, we moved out, we could get a home. We'd save up like it was like a $5 grand deposit or something like that. A 3-5 grand deposit, and there was sort of a vision where we could move forward like our parents did and own our own house and blah blah. But they just come to, I want to buy a house. Yeah, but you're going to need 20 grand deposit to get that. Well, there's no job's going to pay me enough to get a 20 grand deposit. Well, that's the way the UK is at the minute, and it's wrong. Like you say, Phil, what's the point? What point do they see of even trying to better themselves? Because it's just made, in that aspect, the system's breaking down and making it harder for our future generations to forge forward. It's crackers. We're going back. You said we're going backwards as a nation before, because we truly are. We truly are.
And I think there's a massive disparity. It's the old haves and have-nots. I think if you're currently a have, you'll be fine, because there's a lot of protection for what you have. But if we're talking about people starting with nothing, trying to work towards something through earnings and do it on your own account, I think it's so tough.
I think the definition of what is a have has changed, I think, massively, in that you have so much more transparency of bling lifestyles, right, which are not really true lifestyles, but young people can get caught up and that's what it should be about. It should be about a certain type of car, it should be a certain type of holiday, etc. And it's changed the bar of what a standard of living should be, and it's created a falsehood, really. And that's that transparency in the media and the increase in celebrity, which has got completely out of hand.
I mean, I agree. I mean, do you think? I mean, that's true, because if you do not think that's symptomatic of an education system that's absolutely being devalued, whereby you're getting people who are, and this is going to sound so bad, but there's no other way to sugarcoat it, where people are coming out thinking they're better than they are. So if you're getting ones when really it should have been a 2-1, or you're the 40% that got an A, and you're coming out blinking into the wide world thinking you're much better than you actually are, and you get a rude awakening, don't you, when you're not? So that's part of society as a whole now, isn't it?
But I thought you were going to be actually a lot more direct and a lot more rude, because I was going to go down the line of, there are a lot of people in celebrity life who are not particularly smart, okay, and actually do well trading off their lack of smartness, and actually we're racing to a lower bar now. That doesn't set any good standard. It doesn't set any good principle, because it just basically says you can get a shed load of money for being an idiot, and so why would people necessarily want to work hard? And then it's a false economy, because anyway.
We need to find some kind of equilibrium within the whole system, because and especially I know we harp on about this, COVID has knocked everything back. It's put everything back. People who been working at home are very loath to go back to work, because they've got used to working at home. It is a bit of a broken society that's still coming on from COVID. But going back to what Ash was saying about people thinking they're the better, it always reminds me of the Only Fools and Horses clips. I don't know if you watch Only Fools and Horses, but where Derek always told everyone how intelligent Rodney was because he got a GCSE in art. And it's that kind of mentality, isn't it? Oh, I get an F in biology, I'm better than you. Well, how would you wear that? Because my teacher told me so. What are you on about?
Yeah. I think we're just basically, I know it sounds a bit hard, but it's just a society which just celebrates mediocrity all the time, doesn't it, at the end of the day? And it's so hard to differentiate someone who's actually really good at what they do and other people who are blagging it, because it's just, and that basically is people.
Do you not think if our kids are listening to this, they'll just think, you're out of touch. You had
well,
it.
this is why the discussion, yeah.
You know, I mean, they'll say it's one-sided. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's. I'd love to get some sort of 18 to 21-year-olds on now and say, how do you see your future? I mean, we've sort of given our views of what we think their future will be about. Would it be nice to hear from someone and just say, oh, okay, you're 18, or 21, you've just been to uni, or you're going to uni. How do you see the future of your life panning out?
Now, you see, I think in some ways it's less one-way traffic than it is with us. You know, there are a lot more detours that people can make in their educational lives and actually in their professional lives, and still do quite well with it. Because I think we had a very route one approach. It was, to get your O levels, get your A levels, get into university, get your degree. Then you went to a company, you had to do well, or you went to an organization, you had to do well. And now actually, I think it's a little bit less one track minded, and maybe that's made it a little bit more complex, but at the same time, I think it's freed up people with more choice, more options,
Yeah, gone are the days where you used to crave that job where you could stay there for your 30 years and get your gold watch and pension. That's never happened. And I think I read somewhere the longevity of a job for the youngsters now is something like 18 months to 20 months. Average longevity. So they're flipping from job to job to job. So yeah, it's very. I don't mean, like you say, Rod. We had a one-way street, didn't we? You went to school, you lived with your parents, you got a job, you saved up, you bought a house, you married, you had children, and thus the cycle continued. But I don't mean as far as, because the way you would ask teenagers or 18-year-olds if you would have to ask them what's like, they just go, oh, I don't know, whatever. But I'd like to know how they see what the future should be according to their peers. Because we know what it was for our peers, for our mum and dad and teachers telling us what the future should hold and what you should do. But I'd just be curious as to what they think is expected of them in their future. It's, as I say, we're in our 50s, so we can't answer that question, but be interesting to hear.
So we started off with saying, is life for our children more or less stressful than our childhood? And I don't know actually if we've actually answered this, because I think part of the problem is, how do you compare? It's very difficult to compare. Stress. Sorry, Phil.
Well, I'm just going to, on that point you're making, really, how do we compare? Just to leap in, because I said earlier, I don't feel very well informed. And I was thinking myself, well, how do we do that? So I've gone for one brutal measure just while you've been talking there. And I thought, well, what gives at least a view of it? It's very simplistic, quite a brutal view, but suicide rates in the UK, that would be an indicator, would it not? Of, I know it's very simplistic, but I'm just looking at something that says 2001 to 2018. So it's the recent, up to a relatively recent part, over 20 years. And suicide rates in the UK were declining. I don't know if you can see this. It'll just give you sorry for it. I know it's not great for radio, but I'll explain what it is once you've seen how it looks. So it's going down generally over 20 years, then with a little hump about 5 years ago, I think. Not significantly back up in context of 20 years ago, so still a decline. And then it started declining again. Now, on that very simplistic measure, if it is a result of, if you can say suicide results in this concept of pressure, that someone might experience as one cause of it, then it might be supportive of a view that's saying it's becoming less stressful and pressure.
Does that break it down with ages?
It does. There's all sorts, but I haven't been able to.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see, for a certain age group like childhood, which is an awful statistic, isn't it? And then you look at what is it per 100,000? What are they measuring it? Is it an absolute measurement?
may not be able to do it that quickly for our purposes today. I'll just do it quickly, but I might be able to if conversation goes on.
No, I'm just saying overall in society as a whole, it does seem to be going down, doesn't it? I think we said this a few shows back, didn't we? We talked about, mental well-being and health and that sort of thing. I think in terms of stress, I think the education system has made it. This is a bit of a call, less stressful. I think because I feel because, as we said, it's very difficult to fail. I think, isn't it? In terms of you'll always guaranteed a grade, and then you'll probably always guaranteed a subject at university. And then, the biggest stress, as you were saying, Rod, is the financial aspect of it, the loans. And that's whether you've got to pay those off at the end. But even then, that's after a certain limit, isn't it? You've got to earn a certain limit.
It is.
So that even that's not, and then it's written off after a certain amount of time as well. But I just think in our time, it was, for me, I just think it was just so, not so, I said, would draconian the right word? It's just so regimented. It was just, this is an A, this is a B. You need this to get through with that. And then it was, even getting a 1 or a 2-1, it was very much, a degree was so valued at that time, I think. And I just think it's not the same now. Maybe I'm being unfair. I don't know.
No, I tend to agree. It's all a question of degree, isn't it? Paul, I think what you were saying was a degree of pressure is positive, not only because that's how life is for a start, but it also can drive achievement. As you say, we take away discipline. Up to a point, pressure can drive performance in a positive way. And albeit that I'm just going to pick out one aspect of how it can be detrimental to not have that pressure, even though the performance culture has increased within education. So you've got the league tables, but you've got thresholds. And it's occurred to me that I've had a couple of examples given to me of this over time, of where the school or the teacher has to produce a certain number of passes, so at a certain threshold. So what that drives them to do is to focus on individuals, or the set of individuals who are close to the threshold, i.e. just below. That's where they'll focus the efforts. And that's wholly wrong. So what happens to the kid who's a little bit further away from the threshold? They're going to be more comfortable because there's no pressure applied, but that's not a good thing. Yeah. They should be driven in a positive way, the same as the child near the threshold, and it becomes an unfair system then. I know that's only one aspect.
What 100% agree with that. And that is a terrible way to get your scores up for your school, because it happens, doesn't it? You've got to have, I don't know, 6 out of 10, let's say, for just around 6 out of 10 people that have to make this threshold. You've got 5, 6 near that threshold. You're going to work on them, like you say, to make sure they get above that. Meanwhile, the other 4, they might as well just go home and play on the Xbox, because they're not getting the attention that they need.
Do you not think, though, in some ways, for different reasons, it was always thus, that teachers preferred to teach those who were that little bit more brighter, maybe a little bit more driven, and some people naturally fell on the to the wayside anyway. So it's no different, really. That element's no different today.
They always had the teacher's pet, didn't they? And the people who were always sat at the front of the class. But I'll tell you another, on the flip side of that pressure. I had my geography teacher hated me, absolutely hated me. He once told me I would never amount to anything, and there's no way I'd pass. He taught geography, the geography exam, because I was the class clown, blah, 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 blah. Him saying that spurred me on to purposely pass geography, and I passed it. And I felt like going in your face and showing him the pass mark, So on that flip side, when they don't think you're going to do it or good enough, I set out to prove him wrong. I don't know how many kids would do that today, but that's the thing.
I had the same thing on a couple of things, and but I don't think they did that from a a point of view of motivating. They were just negative, you know, and they were just saying, you're useless. You know, there was no sort of science being applied there. Yeah, I don't know about this. I wonder whether our generation is better at dealing with the ambiguity of life than maybe our children's generation, where everything's now far too much verbatim. Everything is overly explained. There's you know, and at times we were probably more. Everything is very clear and transparent and documented in the web. You can get everything from the web, where potentially we had to deal with ambiguity because sometimes there was nowhere else to go. You didn't have any experience, and I just wonder whether that means that we deal with that stress more than maybe they would do. You know, when they get into a situation where things are not that clear, you know, that increases stress. I don't know.
Good point, Rod. Can I just correct something I said earlier? A lesson in life: prepare better. And when looking at stats on a phone, always make sure you scroll across so you see the full graph. Because actually, when you look at the full graph that I was talking about earlier, having scrolled across, whilst there was a dip over the first 10 years of the last 20, it starts going up again after that. So it depends what timescale we're looking at. But actually, that is more of a U-shaped curve.
That's
so
COVID related, Phil.
Say again.
Is that COVID related?
It could well be, couldn't it? But it seems to be on the up before that time. It seems to be more over a 5 or 6 year. And I was searching for the answer to your question, and actually in the 10 to 24 age group, that is where there is the highest level of increase. So I think I'm going to recouch what I said earlier and say it does. If we're going just by that measure, it could well be evidence that things are getting more stressful and pressured.
So what was the vertical, the y-axis then? What was the
it's the number of deaths per 100,000 by suicide in the UK, and then there's further breakdown by age groups. The 3 lines were overall male and female, and they're all largely similar in a broad.
I mean, I was reading actually. There were a point to this saying that because life has become more, what is the word? Almost more manicured, in the sense that it's all smooth. You know, if you know everything is, you know, we can't. For example, we mentioned this a while back. You know, we used to just, you know, play out a lot. We used to go to the park and this, that, and the other. We entertained ourselves a lot of the time. We saw, you know, a lot of the time we tried to sort our own things out. But nowadays, everything is parent control. They take us to play groups and this, that, and the other. And I think they're less able to handle that stress now. So, you know, in our time, as you said, we are battle tested with exams. The education system doesn't allow us, doesn't allow our kids to be withstanding stress, to know what it's like to handle it and how to cope with it, because they go through school thinking possibly, you know, they've got better grades than they have, they're not really a failure. And then suddenly it hits them in the workplace, and it's a shock, isn't it? It's a horrible shock for them. So potentially, maybe, could that be the reason, in the sense that it's a massive shock to the system, because they've not had this. Whilst when we were at school, we've just been told, you know, I'm afraid you failed that. You got to try harder. No, you didn't get that. You didn't get your 7 or 8 O levels. You only got 6 or something. But nowadays, everyone got 9. Yes, it was an E, but don't worry, that was all good. It's still a pass.
I think they're more cosseted nowadays in many ways.
Exactly.
If you think about, as your example of the playing out thing, I know it's a different subject entirely, but it's just representative of a certain neuroticism in us as a generation of parents that we and I wonder whether we pass that on to our children. It communicates itself.
Do you not think, though, that they're overly exposed to other neurosensory things, stresses of life, and therefore it makes it actually very hard to compare, because the types of the information they're able to access now, whether it be about crime, whether it be about, you know, drugs, whether it be about some, you know, sexual assault, for example, whether it be you know,
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, we could do a whole thing on just social media, couldn't we? The exposure and the pressure that brings purely through that medium.
So I think in that way, when I think we've talked about this in other podcasts. And in that way, our lives were more less digital, more what's the alternative?
Simplistic,
analog.
It was analog, actually. You left
Real.
you left certain aspects of your life behind when you left school, when you got off the bus or whatever. Now it follows them everywhere, and image and being image conscious is everywhere. And I think that adds to a different definition of stress. So where we were talking about stress of education and achievement and jobs and money, I think that the definition of stress for them is much more around personality and profile, and that side of things, which is almost a totally different measurement, if you like.
It's crazy. And like Phil said, we could do a full episode on the social media. But when I was at school, if someone said to you, "Oh, you're fat and smelly," it was like, "Yeah, okay, so are you." Blah, 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 blah. My dad's bigger than yours. You go home and that'd be it. You stick that on social media now to some young girl or some lad, and other people joining the, and suddenly they've got 100 hits telling, "Yeah, you are fat and smelly." That's gonna affect them.
That's
it's
stressful.
Gonna affect them. It is stressful, and it is the social media. But I tell you what wasn't stressful, but the kids was finding it stressful now. How many here, because I know I did, 7 years old, 6 years old, going to school with the front door key on a piece of string around your neck. So when you went home, in case your mum and dad was still at work or weren't, you let yourself in. Crazy. They couldn't do that. They'd have a bloody heart attack now if they told them that. And won't be there when you get home, so we won't have your tea. Oh, I've got to make my own tea. Crazy.
I mean, if you're looking at the pressures as well, I mean, if you look at as a pressure of a woman, you look at how rampant sexism was. We talked about the workplace, we talked about comedy, we talked about films. That was so stressful. If you look at the way we progressed with racism now, at that time, it was far worse, I think, personally, and it's improved. It's still there. I'm not going to say it's gone, but, it's a lot better now. You look at, it's great to see, like, I think you mentioned it a few weeks ago, Rod, you're going on about, when your children come back with friends of different, colours and different creed, and I think it's brilliant to see. It's wonderful. It's great, but it was very rare. So, we had a lot more stresses because society was less sophisticated, I think, than it is now. So you can swing that both ways, can't you? Really?
Yeah, I think today, like you say, Ash, I think it's amazing that there is that blend of ethnicities and
absolutely
coming together. And like you say, they understand there's different cultures and ethics, but nobody seems to care about it. If you're Asian with a white person, if you're black in China, it's just all blending into one.
Yeah,
that's a positive.
Very positive.
So here's the $10 million question, gentlemen. Would you swap with your children? Would you rather have been a child of the 70s or the 60s for some of you, than the noughties?
I would firmly say I'd stick with my childhood as it was in the, growing up in the 70s. I loved it. I can't say I had a bad childhood. You're out building dens, you're riding your bike, you're getting into a little bit of mischievous trouble. You're having, and I loved my childhood. I really loved it.
And I love mine, and I wouldn't swap, but I think it's very difficult to say you would swap unless you did have a particularly bad childhood. But when I take a step back from it and look, and I'm going to use the example of yesterday, where the footballer, you might think this is a strange example, but 17-year-old professional footballer has come out as gay.
Yeah,
played for Blackpool. Now, first time ever. So that's indicative of something that's changed, because we didn't get that. Well, and it's always been the case. It's just not statistically possible that gay people didn't ever play football. So that is a change, and that's a massive positive change. And I'm going to use that as just one example to say society is and has become more accepting of a wider range of, and it doesn't have to just be sexuality, states of being, let's call it. You are what you are, and I think that society is more accepting than it was 20, 25, 30 years ago, 50 years ago.
Absolutely.
And how brave was he, Phil? I mean,
Yeah.
statistically, there's no way he can be the first.
He's still brave. But and I very much hope
brave.
that in another 20 years, this is just nothing worth commenting on. But this is the time we're living in when we're moving. This transition is happening from. I think no sensible person would argue against it, but it's the openness. It's still not openness. It's still somehow been unacceptable to come out as gay in football. Why? Why is that? It's ridiculous. But until someone actually does it, we don't shift on. We don't move forward, do we?
No, and it's 17, incredibly young in that profession.
So I think it's great that he feels able to do that.
I mean, what was the guy called?
Justin Fashanu.
Mr. Fashanu. He came out after he'd retired, though, didn't he?
Yeah.
Or did he?
Yes.
Yeah. So he
as did Hitzelberger after he'd retired.
Yeah, he did indeed. Yeah, but I think what we've come to do is it's actually very difficult to compare. And I think if we had any of our children on here, they would say, we haven't got a clue. We're out of touch. Their lives are extremely stressful. And because there's a greater invasion of their privacy and there's more demands on them, etc., etc. And I'm sure when they come to have kids, it'll be exactly the same story, won't it? It's just every generation has their own view.
They do, but I'm optimistic. I think things are still moving forward in a positive way. Overall, we can pick out certain aspects, but overall, I think it's going in the right direction.
No, and I wouldn't swap either. I mean, at the end of the day, the question you asked, it would be swap out. I mean, looking back on it now with society, we're going, sexism, racism, and all that sort of thing. It is what it is. I mean, for progress to occur, then you've got to, I think, witness it sometimes. And we witnessed it. How lucky are we that we witnessed everything that's been happening? I think you mentioned it a while back, Paul. You went about how lucky are we've seen technology progress like this, with phones and TVs and all the rest of it. And it's the same with society. We have seen so much of it. But yet, despite all that, I wouldn't swap because we all wouldn't be who we are if it wasn't for that.
Well, I wouldn't swap my chipper bike and my BMX my Atari and my Commodore 64 for all of that stuff, I gotta say. And Frey Bentos pies for dinner sometimes. So there you go. That's
and watching the A-Team and $6 Million Man. We'll swap it, would we?
I'm sure you can still get Frey Bentos pies, can't you?
You still can
get Frey Bentos pies.
People don't do it, but yeah, there you go.
Someone must.
There you go. Well, I'm child of these. Well, some of you 60s and 70s, and happy with it. Anyway, interesting conversation as always. If any of you listening to this have an alternative point of view, maybe you've got a different viewpoint on this. Maybe you agree with us. Get in contact. RadioAlty@gmail.com and just address it to the Life After Work lads, and we will pick that up. And we'd love to hear from you, actually, especially if you have a different point of view to us. I'm sure many people do. Anyway, guys, next week we'll have another topic on Life After Work. Nice one, guys.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, boys.
Guys.
Cheers, guys.